Tonight, Iran says it will allow inspection of its once secret uranium enrichment plant. Will that be enough to satisfy the United States and Europe? I'm Nancy Cordes. Also tonight, the latest clues in the mysterious case of accused terror suspect Najibullah Zazi. Plus, after an embryo mix-up at a fertility clinic, a birth mother is being called a guardian angel by the baby's grateful parents. And new chapter. Will book lovers be willing to trade in the printed page for a computer screen?
This is the CBS Evening News with Jeff Glor.
Good evening. Jeff Glor is off tonight. We begin tonight with the confrontation between the Western allies and Iran over its just revealed nuclear facility. Here's the latest. Iran said today it would allow UN inspectors inside its underground plant, but did not specify when. The White House reportedly plans to give Iran 3 months to open up all its nuclear plants and records to inspection. And diplomatic efforts continued to impose tough new economic sanctions against Iran. Kimberly Dozier in Washington has the details.
President Obama launched another verbal attack against Iran today. The president demanded Tehran prove it has no plans to build nuclear weapons.
Iran's leaders must now choose. They can live up to their responsibilities and achieve integration with the community of nations. Or they will face increased pressure and isolation and deny opportunity to their own people.
The U.S., British, and French leaders on Friday accused Iran of building a secret nuclear weapons facility, and they threatened sanctions. Iran responded by announcing it would conduct missile tests tomorrow, missiles that could conceivably carry nuclear warheads someday. But Iran's nuclear chief also said he would allow UN inspectors to come see the plant for themselves. That move was hailed by the U.S. Secretary of State ahead of a meeting of Iran and 6 world powers in Geneva next week.
We are hopeful that in preparing for the meeting on October 1st, Iran comes and shares with all of us what they are willing to do and gives us a timetable on which they're willing to proceed.
Iran's president maintains the partially constructed facility is legal and peaceful.
Because in the end of the day, this is a very ordinary facility that has been set up.
But Iranian officials only revealed the plant's existence to the International Atomic Energy Agency this week in a letter. They called it a pilot program that won't be finished for a year and a half. The IAEA says they should have been told months ago. U.S., British, and French intelligence have been tracking secret construction of the plant for more than a year. It's hidden beneath a mountain near Iran's holy city of Qom. Officials say it has space for 3,000 centrifuges, larger than Iran's other nuclear facility. When finished, they say it could produce enough enriched uranium to make 1 bomb a year. The White House shared that intelligence with Iranian ally Moscow. That prompted Russian President Dmitry Medvedev to criticize Iran's nuclear program this week.
President Medvedev of Russia and I agreed that Iran must pursue a new course or face consequences.
Mr. Obama says Iran has to prove it will allow sweeping and continuous inspections. U.S. defense officials say if the diplomats can embarrass Iran into opening this plant to the public, they won't be able to use it for anything but peaceful means. So this could be a positive development. Nancy?
Kimberly Dozier in Washington, thank you. And please stand by because we're going to be coming back to you in just a moment. But first, we're joined in San Francisco by CBS News Middle East analyst Reza Aslan. Reza, good evening to you. And the U.S. and Iran are slated to engage in the first direct talks in decades with Iran just a little over a week from now. How do these revelations change not only U.S. strategy for the talks, but also going forward toward Iran?
Well, Nancy, the U.S. and Iran have different priorities for these talks. Obviously, the United States wants to talk about Iran's nuclear program. Iran, on the other hand, wants to talk about a whole range of issues, from the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to sanctions to the situation in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think that this is now going to put an enormous amount of pressure on Iran to put all those other issues on the back burner and actually talk about what America wants to talk about, and that is its nuclear program.
You mentioned sanctions. The U.S. has threatened crippling sanctions. Is that something that could work?
I don't think so, for a couple of reasons. One, I don't think that you're going to get Russia and China to agree to the kinds of crippling sanctions that Secretary of State Clinton was talking about before. This primarily means that since Iran has to actually export a lot of its oil so that it can be refined in other countries, and then it buys it back at a terrible price, what the United States wants to do is make it impossible for that kind of refinement to take place in countries like Dubai. Iran, on the other hand, has said that because this is going to be such a huge effect on its own economy, that they would consider such sanctions an act of war. They would immediately close the Strait of Hormuz, and that would force the United States to take some sort of military action. So this is the kind of a sanction process that I don't think is a real possibility right now.
So what's the alternative then? Because we've heard the Secretary of Defense make it pretty clear that military action is not a possibility, at least not a good possibility here.
It seems very clear that the military option is not on the table the way that President Obama wants to say it is. Frankly, the only option right now is negotiations. October 1st is going to be a historic event, the first time that these two countries have sat across the table to talk about these important things. It's going to be a very long process, but at least we're talking. That's a good thing. We'll see where it goes from here.
Reza Aslan, Middle East expert, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
My pleasure.
And there's also word tonight that General Stanley McChrystal has hand-delivered his request for more U.S. troops in Afghanistan to General Mike Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. For more on that, we turn back to Kimberly Dozier in Washington. Kimberly, what can you tell us?
Well, what we know is that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, want to keep this plan basically to themselves until the president himself is ready to read it. They don't want it leaked anywhere. We're told it could include a troop request of up to 40,000 troops, half of which may be trainers to train the Afghan National Security Forces. But at this point, until the president decides on his strategy going forward, they don't want this out in the press.
This is an issue, the troop levels, that really divides the administration into two camps, isn't it?
Well, the president has to decide whether he wants to stick with counterinsurgency, which means protecting the population. That means he will probably need more troops, or go with counterterrorism, which means fewer U.S. troops on the ground. But some experts say we might lose the war in Afghanistan.
All right, Kimberly Dozier in Washington, many thanks to you this evening. And a reminder, you can see an exclusive interview with General Stanley McChrystal tomorrow evening on the season premiere of 60 Minutes. Two suicide car bombings, hours apart, killed at least 16 people in northwest Pakistan. The Taliban claimed responsibility for the attacks outside a police station and an army-run bank. A Taliban spokesman warned of more attacks to come. Back in this country, accused terrorist Najibullah Zazi is in a Brooklyn prison tonight, facing a federal court hearing on Tuesday. Investigators are trying to figure out how the life of this one-time street vendor led to this moment. Hari Srinivasan has more.
By some accounts, he was a typical hard-working immigrant, a shuttle bus driver in Colorado, a coffee cart vendor in New York, at ease with his customers and even with the news media.
Of course not. I have nothing to do with Al-Qaeda and any link or anything with Al-Qaeda.
It is a striking contrast from the picture painted by law enforcement officials of a discontented man who they accuse of purchasing large quantities of chemicals at beauty supply stores to mix into bombs for a terror attack in the United States. Zazi, an Afghan immigrant, moved to Queens as a teenager in the early 90s. He reportedly dropped out of Flushing High School because he wanted to work full-time.
It's a mixed school. It's real good. The principals, the students, higher education. I was surprised when I heard about it.
Most of Zazi's life in Queens was lived within just a few blocks. He went to that high school, he attended this mosque, and he worked at a corner store and got his hair cut just down the block.
I was very shocked. It was just very unexpected. I didn't expect it from him at all.
Mark Kogan cut Zazi's hair at this neighborhood barbershop. He says Zazi was a good customer, could make conversation easily, and only recently seemed to become more religious.
He would be like, oh, you would have a better life, everything would be so much better for you if you would turn to being Muslim.
Where Zazi got his newfound zeal for Islam is unclear, although authorities say he did attend terror training camps like this one in Pakistan. But that is not all that makes a person like Zazi so frightening to terrorist expert Jarrett Brockman.
To me, this does look like the new face of terrorism here in the United States because, he's able to operate so seamlessly here within this culture.
Which may explain why authorities moved so quickly once they believed he was ready to act.
He was further than nearly any other plot that I've seen here in the States. It looked and smelled a lot like the July 7th, 2005 bombings in London.
Zazi will be arraigned in federal district court in New York on Tuesday. Hari Srinivasan, CBS News, New York.
In California, mourners eulogized 24-year-old Annie Lay, the Yale doctoral student who was found murdered on campus almost 2 weeks ago. on the very day she was to be married. A lab technician has been charged with killing the Vietnamese-American medical researcher days earlier. Still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, the fertility clinic mix-ups that are causing heartbreak in 2 cities. In the last few days, shocking mix-ups of frozen embryos at in vitro fertilization centers in 2 states have come to light. Now, a clinic outside New Orleans that suspended operations could find itself in legal jeopardy, as we hear from Mark Strassman.
In New Orleans, Ochsner Hospital's admitted mishandling of frozen embryos could be costly to more than its reputation. Lawyers are circling for as many as 100 affected patients.
My clients have struggled with this travesty for the past year.
Lawyer Melanie Lagarde represents Abraham and Kim Whitney. They say Ochsner admits losing 4 of their frozen embryos.
They want to know what happened to their embryos.
Ochsner admits some embryos frozen for later use were mislabeled or are missing in its in vitro fertilization center, despite safeguards that should have included barcoding, color coding, and labeling.
We are disappointed in ourselves.
But the hospital says no to the big question. Did any families go home with the wrong child?
And all I can say is that we have no evidence.
But at an Ohio fertility clinic, that did happen. Carolyn Savage had the wrong embryo implanted in her.
You just can't believe you're in a situation where this is unfolding the way it is.
Yesterday, Savage gave birth to a baby boy and will give him to his biological parents, Paul and Shannon Morrill.
To give this baby a chance at life, to have a normal life, even though this child had a very unusual start.
Joyful new parents now, the Morrills admit high anxiety when they first learned of the mix-up.
I didn't know if she was going to terminate, if she was going to carry it. I didn't know who the people were. It was terrible.
The new worry, whether similar mix-ups happened because of Ochsner's mistakes.
I have to tell you that it is my client's greatest fear.
Ochsner has suspended its in vitro program indefinitely pending a complete review and has offered free DNA testing to any affected patient that wants it. Mark Strassman, CBS News, Atlanta.
In the Philippines, a typhoon has dumped record amounts of rain on Manila, causing at least 40 deaths. A month's worth of rain fell on the city in only 5 hours, flooding streets and stranding people on rooftops. Just ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, the latest bright idea from the man who dreamed up cash for clunkers. The government has now paid auto dealers 98% of the rebates owed on the 700,000 cars purchased in exchange for gas guzzlers in the popular Cash for Clunkers program. One of the innovators behind that program now has another bright idea. Kelly Wallace has more.
Before we ever heard of Cash for Clunkers, before it revved up the economy by billions of dollars this summer, there was an entrepreneur with a vision.
In my office, we named it Jack's Jalopy Law internally.
41-year-old Jack Hittery, one of the program's architects, knew he was onto something.
We can take these guzzlers off the road.
But getting traction in Washington wasn't easy.
It was early days, a lot of skeptical looks in the audience. But we, persevered, went on.
And now he wants to drive the concept into our living rooms, literally.
Our homes are inefficient. Our homes have lots of leaks. Our homes don't have great insulation. Our homes have older windows.
Hittery believes the way to get Americans to retrofit their homes is with a new kind of municipal bond that would finance loans for improvements like weatherproofing and upgrading your heating system. Instead of paying interest to a bank, the loan is paid off over 20 years through slightly higher property taxes, but would be offset by lower utility bills, as much as 70%.
It creates green-collar jobs, reduces the energy bills for consumers, reduces greenhouse gas emissions.
The program, which got a boost from former President Clinton this week, already exists in 15 states. Hittery wants to make it national.
We have to appeal to people's pocketbooks.
A Brooklyn native, Hittery led a coalition to get fuel-efficient taxis on New York City streets. Now 1 in 6 are hybrids. That success inspired Cash for Clunkers and now loans to retrofit homes. But Hittery, who builds up and sells off startup companies, isn't satisfied.
My wish list, cash for clunkers for power plants, okay?
If this visionary has his way, that program could come to a power plant near you. Kelly Wallace, CBS News, New York.
Coming up on tonight's CBS Evening News, sexual offenders from the U.S. arrested for allegedly abusing children overseas. The long captivity of J.C. Dugard in Antioch, California, has many people asking how sex offenders like her captor, Philip Garrido, are able to go unnoticed. But as Ben Tracy tells us, some offenders are accused of going great distances to commit their crimes.
These men have good reason to hide their faces. They're accused of being sex tourists, American citizens who travel to Cambodia to have sex with children.
Boarding a plane to a foreign land is no protection.
This week in Los Angeles, 3 convicted sex offenders from California were arraigned in federal court. The first Americans arrested in an international law enforcement crackdown called Operation Twisted Traveler.
Pedophiles are sadly mistaken if they think they can get away with exploiting children in another country in order to satisfy their own perverted desires.
75-year-old Jack Sporich is one of California's most dangerous sexual predators. He served 9 years in prison, but in 2008 traveled to Cambodia. According to the criminal complaint, Sporich would drive through poor towns throwing money and candy. He is accused of having sex with 3 boys ages 9 to 13.
The trauma that they've endured is unimaginable and will haunt them the rest of their lives.
Tough laws here requiring convicted sex offenders to register are sending them into hiding to remote spots like Antioch, California, where Philip Garrido hid J.C. Dugard for 18 years. Some go much farther.
By driving people out of cities and into more rural areas, we are again losing contact and not knowing where these people are.
Overall, an estimated 2 million children worldwide are exploited in sex industries. Thailand, Cambodia, and Costa Rica are popular destinations for sex tourists because laws are weakly enforced and sex is cheap and readily available. The 3 men arrested in Operation Twisted Traveler will be tried in November and face 30 years in prison for each of their victims. Ben Tracy, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, will book lovers be forced to turn the page? Finally tonight, a reading revolution. From libraries to elementary schools to college campuses, real books, the kind you can hold in your hand, are being replaced by e-books downloadable to a handheld device. Is it a gimmick, or could it transform the way we read and learn?
It's not a rock concert or a food festival, but books that are drawing these crowds to the National Mall. The printed page still has the power to enthrall. Though at this bookmobile, there's not a printed page in sight.
They can download digital media for free, and that's audiobooks, ebooks, music, and video.
And it's sponsored not by some high-tech company, but by your public library. Surprised? Libraries are changing with the times, says Washington, D.C.'s chief librarian.
Well, we used to be the place that held the books. We're now in some places the connection point.
Many public libraries now make books available via their websites for free. All you need is a device to download them and a library card. No returns, no late fees.
The titles actually automatically expire at the end of each lending period. So there is no worry for the expiration dates or having to go back to the library to physically return the book.
Overdrive, the company that manages over 9,000 library websites, estimates 30 million people visited the website of their local library in 2008, a 63% increase over the year before.
It's gotten more people reading one way or another, and I think that ebook format really appeals to a lot of folks. I see them on Metro, I see them on airplanes, I love it.
And now on some college campuses, ebooks are replacing textbooks. This fall, 6 universities were selected to try the Kindle DX, Amazon.com's newest digital reader.
I'd like to think that what you hold in your hands tonight is the future.
And how does the future feel for students at New York's Pace University?
Some of my friends have come out of the bookstore paying $800 for a semester of books. So with the books being so cheap on the Kindle, it's definitely well worth it.
It's kind of confusing to learn how to, navigate and stuff. I'd much rather just, open up a textbook and flip to the page.
And going digital can be costly. The newest Kindle DX sells for just under $500. That's the CBS Evening News. I'm Nancy Cordes, CBS News in New York. Good night.